Midnight pinned the room flat as a blade, and the old frame breathed like a lung beside my laptop, a slow sigh that lifted the hairs on my neck. I told myself I was tired, then the square inside the photo leaned darker, as if clouds rolled only in that paper sky. My name scratched the air in a voice I knew and didn't, and I whispered, "Liam, stop it," like talking to a dog I didn't own. A far scream threaded the radiator, thin as ice, and my chair ticked forward by the thickness of a coin. The woman by the fountain in the image had looked left all day. Now she faced me, mouth almost open. I blinked and swore, this is a trick, but the glass showed faint prints like breath from things too patient to fog. Street lamps in the picture glowed against a noon that didn't belong, and I felt the room tilt as if water found a seam. The desk hummed with a buried note. The frame was the instrument. I said, "If you move when I look away, then watch me," and failed in the next second. The moment my eyes flinched, the child at the curb stepped closer to the glass, and the scream ended with a smile I could not see. Morning sliced the room thin, and denial rode in with the coffee I didn't taste as I told myself the night had been a bad splice of stress and rain. I lifted the frame with a tea towel, pretending I cared about smudges and not about fingerprints on the wrong side of the glass. The square inside looked brighter than the day beyond my window, like noon trapped in amber. I said, "You're not special," and set it near the books where the sun could test it. The child stood nearer the curb now, shoes pointed at me, and the woman by the fountain watched like a patient with news. Pipes clicked a measured rhythm, and my breath tried to match it and failed. My phone camera opened to a blank optimism, but the preview stuttered as if the lens feared what I asked it to see. "If you were a trick, do it again," I said, sounding less brave than a whisper. The room tasted like coins, and the sun felt counterfeit, and I kept the frame anyway, because leaving it would mean it had won. I listed reasons like pills, fatigue, trick glass, suggestible mind, and each dissolved before it reached my throat. The ribbon in the child's fist had not existed yesterday, and I remembered a ribbon once tied to a hospital rail, a knot I couldn't untie. I said "don't" to a memory and stared until my eyes watered, hoping the scene would blur back to ordinary. The square did not oblige. Cobbles glistened like the underside of a lid, and the fountain spat a thread of water I hadn't noticed. My phone buzzed from Harper, who said, "You're spiraling," and I answered, "Maybe," while moving closer. The glass smelled faintly like rain in an attic, which made no sense, and made too much sense. I tapped the pane and felt a heartbeat that was not mine. 3 slow beats, like a door knocked from far away. "Stop," I said, but my voice asked for more. I watched the ribbon brighten, a small red signal that knew exactly where I lived. The power hiccuped and the room breathed out, shadows pooled where corners should have been straight. I threw a dish towel over the frame, a useless shroud, and told the empty apartment, "I'm returning it," as if stores could take back hauntings. The towel bulged inward from a pressure that should not exist in fabric, a soft thumbprint pressing from the wrong side. Pipes groaned in a voice that tried on my name and nearly wore it. I counted aloud, 1 to 5, like the old trick from a therapist, and the numbers felt like teeth. The phone camera opened again, and the preview dissolved to gray where the frame should be, an erasure shaped exactly like my fear. "This isn't happening," I said, which was a contract the room refused to sign. I stood still enough to hear the towel shift, as if someone adjusted their hair beneath it. I didn't lift the cloth, and I absolutely lifted the cloth. The cloth fell like a finished sentence, and the glass showed a fingerprint from the inside that echoed the scar on my knuckle, a rhyme in skin. I said no to the room, and yes to the frame by not turning away. The square's light had cooled as if the sun there was tired of pretending noon, and the woman tilted her head as if listening to my pulse. I whispered, "If you're listening, stop," and the only answer was the tick of the wall clock, forgetful of minutes. The child's shoes were now wet enough to shine, and their reflection doubled them into 4, like a choice I didn't get to make. Water sounds came from the radiator, but the fountain's lip in the photo darkened as though freshly splashed. I raised the frame an inch, weight dragged back, heavier than wood, as if held from the other side. "Don't make me look away," I said, and blinked. When my eyes reopened, the child's face kissed the glass and smiled with someone else's mouth. Day broke thinly, yet the picture's sky looked swollen with storm clouds that did not exist beyond my window. I sipped lukewarm coffee, staring at the street outside in real life. But the photo insisted on its false glow. My hand trembled against the mug, and I muttered, "You're nothing," though I already believed it was everything. The child now stood nearer to the glass, shoes scuffed as if dirt could rub through paper. A hiss leaked from the radiator, but my ear swore it matched the scrape of footsteps. I pulled the curtains wide, inviting daylight, but the square only darkened deeper, swallowing color into slate. My phone screen reflected my pale face, but when I checked the photo through its lens, gray static devoured it. I said, "You won't trick me again," as if the room listened, but silence made me feel smaller. The air had the heaviness of a cellar, pressing from all sides. I lowered my cup, and my breath caught when a lamppost in the image flickered with fireflies of light, even though I hadn't looked away. The antique shop smelled of varnish and mold, its lamps weak under decades of dust. I carried the frame wrapped in cloth, setting it on the counter like a cursed offering. The clerk, Mr. Keene, narrowed his eyes, a shrug waiting in his mouth. I explained the movements, the shifts, the voices, but his smile held pity and nothing else. "As found," he said, tapping the frame's corner as if it were just wood. He leaned closer, voice low, "Never break its seal." "That's the rule." I asked what seal, and he only tapped again, leaving his answer caged in silence. The shop's shadows stretched taller than shelves should allow, and I felt every object's eye on me. "I can't keep it," I told him, but his hand pushed the frame back, firm and final. He added, "It's yours now." My stomach dropped into the dust beneath us, and I knew I would walk out still carrying it, no matter what I wanted. Back home, I set the frame on my desk and angled my phone against it, ready for proof. A time-lapse app blinked green, promising objectivity I craved. Hours later, the files sat waiting, but when I pressed play, the footage stuttered, frames dissolving into gray smears. Not 1 second of clarity showed, as though the camera itself refused to witness. I replayed again and again, begging the pixels to give me a shadow, a clue, but the square stared blank, void and mocking. "You're cheating," I whispered, throat raw with something between laughter and fear. The radiator groaned like laughter back, a hollow chorus I couldn't stop hearing. I deleted the files, but the corrupted thumbnails lingered like ghosts, shapes refusing to vanish. My hand hovered to close the laptop, but the screen flickered once, showing my reflection double, as if two of me sat staring. Harper dropped by, laughter at the edges of their voice when I explained the shifting photo. They circled the frame, arms crossed, dismissing every detail with talk of pareidolia and imagination. "It's just tricks of light," Harper said, shaking their head. Their skepticism scraped raw against my nerves, yet I envied the certainty in their tone. "You're seeing what you want to see," they added, and I wanted to shout that I never asked for this. Instead, I bit my tongue, tasting iron, and nodded while my stomach coiled. The frame sat silent, obedient in their presence as if mocking me privately. Harper laughed once more, ruffling my shoulder before leaving, their confidence a shield I didn't have. The door closed, and I stood alone, room heavier, silence sharp as glass. I whispered to the still square, "Why behave for them, and not me?" Alone again, I dared a final glance. My blood cooled. A new figure had appeared in the photo, someone watching from a distant window of a stone house. The figure clutched a frame of their own, tiny but unmistakable, a picture within the picture. My breath fractured, shallow and uneven, and my knees weakened as if gravity wanted me closer. "Who are you?" I muttered, but the silence answered with a thick stillness. I leaned closer, nose nearly brushing glass, but the reflection no longer matched me. The gear's frame glimmered faintly, a mirror mocking mine. My phone vibrated with a message I didn't check. I only stared, caught in the loop of gazes that spiraled inward. For the first time, I felt not that I was looking at the photo, but that the photo was looking at me, deeply and deliberately. Night crept in with a hush so heavy, it bent the room. I kept the frame on the desk like a live coal that refused to cool. Footsteps rose from the picture's cobbles, and since to knocks in my hallway. I said, "Who's there?" but the answer came from stone I could not touch. The fountain spray in the photo trembled, and my radiator wheezed like a dying bird. I counted my breaths and lost track at 4, then started again. The square inside darkened to ink while my ceiling stayed pale and useless. A cold seam opened between my shoulder blades and ran down my spine. I told the empty air, "Stop matching me," and the knocks stuttered to mock my rhythm. The woman by the fountain tilted her head as if catching a secret. "I'll won't." I pressed my palms to the desk until wood grain printed my skin. When the last knock hit, the glass flashed a ripple that felt like a pulse. Clouds smothered the in-photo sky until it looked stapled shut. My apartment air thinned, colder by the minute, though the heater kicked and failed. Condensation braided along my window in long finger arcs. I wiped a sleeve across the glass and watched the streaks reappear beneath my touch. "Not funny," I said, like a parent scolding weather. The square's cobbles bled shine as if rain fell there and nowhere else. I dragged a blanket around my shoulders and felt none of it. The lamp flickered and shadows layered like blinds over my walls. The woman watched me with a patience that tasted like salt. I imagined the town smelling of damp wool and apples. The radiator coughed and spat a drop that never reached my floor. In the frame, the drop finished its fall and darkened the stone. My phone pinged once, then again, then, in a chain that broke my nerves. Harper's messages stacked, each the same sentence in clipped calm. The line read, "Don't let them see you blink," over and over. I called, but the dial tone throbbed like a vein in the wall. "Pick up," I said, pacing grooves into the rug. The frame sulked in silence, its square pretending to be ordinary. I scrolled further and found the texts time-stamped before I woke. My throat tightened to a straw, and air came in sips. I asked the room, who sent those as if it could admire the trick. The last message pinned itself to my screen and would not slide. I set the phone face down and still felt its light on my skin. In the picture, the child raised the ribbon to cover one eye. Sirens swam past the building like bright fish with broken songs. The tenant chat burst with notes about a missing neighbor and unlocked doors. I read each line twice and heard the radiator knock in sympathy. I told myself this city eats people without help from frames. The square inside showed a new emptiness where the child had stood. "No," I said, stepping closer until breath fogged glass. The woman's shoulders turned as if measuring the absence. A draft found the back of my neck and tapped like a wet finger. I opened the door and stared into a hallway that smelled of metal. No footsteps, only the elevator resting like a held breath. I shut the door gently and locked it twice. When I looked back, the child's place remained perfectly empty. Sleep came like a trap with velvet teeth. I dreamed the cobbles under my shoes and woke tasting iron and fog. In the dream, I crossed the square while the town held its breath. The fountain's lip was warm, and the woman whispered a word I forgot on waking. I sat up to darkness and a weight in my palm. Gravel rested there, cold and real, a proof I did not request. "Tell me I brought this from somewhere," I said, failing at reason. I held the pieces to the frame's lower groove and found a perfect fit. The match clicked like a key in a lock I never owned. The square did not change, yet I felt taller and thinner, stretched toward the glass. I folded my fingers closed and felt the grit bite back. The room watched me watch it, and no one blinked. The email came after midnight, a reply from Evelyn Marsh, whose name I had never spoken aloud. She wrote with precision, asking for the inscription hidden on the back panel. My pulse jumped because I had never told her the frame had words at all. I whispered, "How did you know?" but the screen only glowed cold in answer. I turned the frame in my hands and felt the wood complain with a groan, as if old bones disliked being disturbed. The back was smooth until my finger found a ridge, faint and sharp. I pressed my nail there and felt letters, carved not for sight but for touch. The apartment darkened around me, the light falling off the desk as though drawn into the glass. I sat still, breath shallow, and imagined Evelyn waiting for what I would send her. Her words on the screen repeated in my head. Describe exactly what is written, nothing less. I angled a screwdriver into the seam and pried just enough to see what lay beneath without breaking it open. The panel shifted a hair's breadth, sighing like breath through a crack. My phone light cut across the wood and revealed the shallow scratches of Latin letters. I whispered the phrase aloud, each syllable rolling bitter across my tongue. The words meant, "We watch who watches," a curse written in a language I did not know yet felt. My stomach coiled, and sweat beaded cold on my forehead. The frame shook faintly in my grip, a tremor like a warning. I set it down gently, as if it were a child I could not wake. The room answered with silence too deliberate to be empty. Evelyn's reply came fast, as if she had been waiting in the dark. She explained the maker had trapped witness souls into glass to preserve crimes unseen by courts. She wrote that attention was their food, and staring at them gave them ground. I read the words twice, then shut the laptop, heart cracking against my ribs. I whispered, "If I starve you, you fade," but my voice wavered. I turned the frame face down on the desk, pressing the cloth against it like a coffin lid. The wood pulsed faintly, as though disagreeing with my choice. Evelyn's final line glowed in my head. "Do not forget, their eyes are not yours to meet." Evelyn shared a story I never asked for, about Cora Vale, a woman photographed at the edge of her life. The last picture of her shifted until her killer confessed, but by then she was already gone. I stared at the name, tasting it like iron coins. My hands shook, and I muttered, "She's the one at the fountain," certain now that I knew her face. The photo on my desk seemed to grow heavier with that knowledge, the fountain darker, her dress glistening wet as though from rain or blood. I covered my eyes, yet still saw her face imprinted on the dark inside of my lids. I flipped the frame fully onto its face and pushed it tight against the wall. Still, the sound of dozens of feet turning in unison filled the air, a shuffle that echoed like a parade under the floor. I held my breath, terrified of what I could not see. My knuckles pressed white against the wood, and the surface felt alive with vibrations. The curtains stirred, though no window was open. I whispered, "You can't see me now," though I knew they could. The sound swelled, a chorus of unseen movement, then fell silent all at once. The silence was worse because it felt like a crowd holding its breath in the dark. Evelyn's next message struck like a knife, a scanned image of a wider original print. In the far corner of that old square was a man with my profile, camera in hand, frozen in sepia, a century before I was born. I muttered, "That's not me." But my throat betrayed me with a tremor. The edges of the photo shook in my grip as if something inside recognized me. My reflection in the laptop screen leaned closer than I had, overlapping with the man's face in the scan. I pressed my palm against the desk to steady myself, leaving sweat marks on the wood. I said coincidence, but the word felt brittle and false. The town in the frame glowed brighter for a moment, as though mocking my denial. My stomach tightened with the weight of recognition I could not accept. I closed the laptop, but the outline of the figure burned behind my eyes like an afterimage that would not fade. I told myself this was chance, a trick of bone and shadow, but the frame disagreed. Its glass flared with a dim reflection of my own apartment, the couch and lamp flickering where the window in the picture should be. I staggered back and nearly tripped over the rug. "No," I breathed, as if refusal could bleach it clean. The photograph had swallowed my living room and set it inside the square. I grabbed the frame, shaking it, but the image remained fixed, my furniture trapped like props in a set I could not touch. I slammed it face down, then lifted it again, praying the illusion would vanish, but the scene grew sharper instead. My couch looked more real inside the glass than behind me. My pulse battered against my throat like a trapped bird. I whispered, "You don't belong there," but the reflection whispered back in silence, suggesting maybe it did. My phone rang and Harper's voice broke through, thin and jittered by static. They confessed to moving the frame days earlier, laughing, calling it a prank. The laughter cut mid-breath, replaced by muffled sounds of many people murmuring, distant like a crowd under earth. I called Harper's name again and again, but only soft shuffling answered. I shouted, "Stop joking," though my voice cracked more with fear than anger. The line hissed, and then went silent, leaving only the echo of my own breath. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs would split. I slammed the phone onto the desk, staring at the frame for a clue. The figures inside stood silent, unchanged, except the windows glowed with faint silhouettes I had never seen before. Harper's laughter seemed trapped in that light, looping without sound, a reminder I could not pull them back. I leaned closer to the frame and saw it, a faint fingerprint pressed against the inside of the glass. The scar along my knuckle matched it perfectly, an echo that should not exist. My knees weakened, and I gripped the desk for balance. I whispered, "That can't be mine," though the shape left no room for doubt. My throat felt packed with gravel as I remembered touching the glass, never from the inside, only ever outside. The reflection in the pane shimmered with a grin I didn't recognize as my own. I pulled my hand back, shaking, hiding the scar in my sleeve like that could erase it. The fingerprint on the inside of the glass remained, mocking my denial. My chest filled with a buzzing panic, too sharp to breathe past. "You've taken more than my face," I whispered. "You've taken my place." The glass seemed to listen, and listening was worse than answering. Evelyn's next email offered no mercy. Her words carved themselves into me, saying if the frame recognizes you, then you are already written into its square. I stared at the message until letters blurred, but their weight pressed into my bones. "No," I said, like refusal could alter ink, but the truth sat cold and absolute. The square inside the frame seemed brighter now, cobbles wet and shining like a stage prepared. The woman turned her face toward me, patient, waiting for my entrance. I thought of running, smashing the frame, burying it, but each thought curled into futility. My reflection leaned further into the glass than I did, as though eager to step through. My breath fogged, but the glass showed no haze. The silence pressed tight around me, and the words rang again. "It has already begun." I killed the lamp and let the room thin to a spill of street glow. I set the frame upright and spoke to its glass like it could bargain. I said, "Tell me what you want, and I will give less than that." The square breathed with a hush that matched my lungs and then led them. I felt watched from behind and from within the scene at once. Fountains shimmered as if the water heard my pulse as a drum. I said, "Leave Harper out of this, and take only my attention." The cobbles brightened a shade, pretending to agree with my terms. A door silhouette deep in the photo grayed into shape, then blurred away. I stepped closer until my breath fogged the outside, but not the inside. I said, "I see you, so you do not have to come here," and waited. Something on their side smiled without a face, and kept smiling. I did not blink, and noon bloomed inside the picture like a trap sprung in daylight. The square shone so bright, I felt the heat on my cheekbone. Anya. A narrow door in a stone facade cracked open, and spilled ash that fell like snow. I said, "What is that?" though the taste already lived in my mouth. The ash landed in patterns like footprints that paused and listened. Far windows lacquered themselves with a bright skin and peeled it back. My room stayed night, while their day sharpened to knives. A bell somewhere tolled once, and refused to name itself. I reached a finger toward the hinge and stopped before contact. "You can close it," I said, and the gap widened instead. The ash curled midair into letters I could not read at speed. I felt the urge to step back and knew I would not. She moved then, not a jump, only a careful human turn that hurt to watch. Cora lifted her chin and formed words I could not hear yet, somehow new. Her mouth shaped, "Help me leave," and the plea pressed the air like a hand. I said, "How?" and the shadow behind her softened into my outline. It matched my shoulders, my tilt, and my bad habit of leaning right. I laughed once, and hated the sound because it sounded borrowed. The square edged darker at the rim, like a theater dimming around a cue. I told Cora I would try and felt the lie and the hope share a bone. Water climbed the fountain lip like a tongue tasting new weather. The ash letters paused, then blew toward me and stuck to the glass. The shape behind her stepped where I would have stepped. My name arrived in the hush without sound, and still cut deep. My apartment door rattled once, then again the knob twitching like a trapped nerve. The frame rattled back in perfect sympathy, hinge to hinge. I said no trades, and the square leaned brighter, as if to show me the receipt. I realized the only door open to me was the one that wanted me. If Cora left, something of equal measure needed to replace her place. The thought slid into me and locked all the way. I pressed my hand flat to the wood and felt an answer meet it from inside. The hall outside went very quiet, the kind of quiet that checks its watch. There must be another rule, I said, and hope folded small as a coin. My reflection in the glass stepped half a beat ahead of me. I tried to lag and watched it refuse. The fountain bubbled once like laughter that regretted itself. I lifted the frame and felt it lift me back, like a tide taking my ankles. I pressed my forehead to the glass, and the chill wrote a circle on my skin. A second heartbeat nested under mine and climbed to match it beat for beat. "Only me," I said to the square, and the square listened like a judge. The room tipped a few degrees and stayed there, as if gravity had learned my name. Water noise swelled, though my radiator sat dumb and cold. I tasted stone and copper and something sweet from years I never lived. The ash outside the door swirled into a path that led exactly to me. I closed my eyes and saw the cobbles closer than a thought. "Come out," I told Cora, though the sentence owned me all the way through. The last thing I felt was heat like noon under a sky I did not trust. Then the glass pulsed once, and the beat inside me set the terms. Morning broke pale through the blinds, but it carried no warmth into the room. Harper came back with a nervous apology, their shoes squeaking on the wet floor. They called my name, and froze when they saw the frame lying on its side near the desk. The square inside showed no child, no fountain, no movement, only a vacant square where people had been. At the fountain's edge now stood a new figure, shoulders narrow, head bowed, unmistakably me. Harper whispered, "Liam," as if my reflection could answer. They bent closer, and the silence pressed against their ears. The air held a chill that belonged to stone streets and not an apartment. Harper's hand hovered near the frame but never touched, as though contact would finish what had already begun. Later that day Evelyn arrived, her presence quiet but heavy, carrying a canvas bag like a ritual kit. She studied the frame without touching it, her glasses flashing the glow of the square. "The clock," she said, pointing to the tower inside, and Harper leaned closer. The hands no longer read noon, but the exact time of Harper's first missed call, frozen forever. Evelyn whispered, "It is marking moments that matter, not hours," and the sentence cut colder than fact. Harper asked what to do, and Evelyn only shook her head, shoulders sinking under knowledge she could not share. The air felt as if it had already chosen the next chapter. Together they wrapped the frame in thick cloth and bound it with cord, placing it face down against the wall. Evelyn said, "It should not be seen," her voice steady though her fingers trembled. Harper nodded, unwilling to argue, though his eyes flicked back to the hidden glass again and again. A faint stain seeped onto the floor beneath the wood, dark and irregular, forming the outline of two overlapping footprints. Harper whispered, "It's leaking," but Evelyn hushed him with a glance. They stood in silence, the air vibrating faintly, as if the square still breathed through its shroud. The apartment smelled faintly of damp stone, a scent that refused to fade. That night Harper lay awake on the couch, every sound amplified by the silence around it. From the closet came a faint tapping, like fingernails brushing from within. He froze, breath shallow, and listened harder. A muffled voice rose through the wood, not quite words but close, syllables warped by distance. Harper leaned forward, and the shape of the sound became clearer. It repeated a phrase like the echo of a warning, soft and pleading, "Don't blink." Harper pressed his palms against his ears, shaking his head, but the voice threaded through skin and bone. He whispered, "Stop," though nothing obeyed. The sound lingered, steady and patient. The final quiet came hours later. Harper rose to find the frame upright again without hands touching it. The cloth had slipped away as though never tied. Inside the photo, dusk settled over the town square, cobbles bruised with fading light. At the fountain stood the new resident, no longer blurred, staring outward with eyes Harper knew too well. It was my face reflected through their glass world, steady and waiting. Harper whispered, "Liam," and the name felt too heavy to carry. The air stilled, pressing into silence that felt final yet unfinished. The photo glowed faintly, not with light but with attention, as though the town itself was awake and watching through me.